I've been practicing for decades, and in the old days, women were favored. They were favored to keep the house. That is just not the case anymore. Welcome back. I'm Denise Isaacs, and this is Leah Mayersohn. We're two experienced divorce lawyers who want to educate you and tell you everything so that you know exactly what to do and you can decide yourself and you can advise your friends. That's what we're all here for.
And today we're going to talk about the question of, are men treated fairly in a divorce? What do you think, Denise?
This is a difficult question because first we have the, how do men feel about themselves when they are in a divorce situation or when they're in marriage? Do they feel that they are the ones who are responsible for everything financially? And what are their, what is it that they feel that they have to do in terms of the children, in terms of the household? It just really, there's like an entire world of people at each end of the spectrum, men, okay, husbands at each end of the spectrum, and fathers, okay, well, because we're also going to be talking about paternity and divorce and husbands and fathers. So,
well, I think the number one question that I get asked by male clients is, are they going to be treated fairly with respect to custody? And I know the laws changed a few years ago in Florida, fortunately for men. So I know it's great. Legislature finally came around. But there are times where the courts can go ahead and diverge from that. So do you think men are going to get a fair shot regarding custody now in Florida?
I want you to know that Florida has become a state where men get custody 50% of the time. There's a presumption of custody. And I cannot tell you how many men in so many other states this is not the case. And they are so heartbroken, and it is so difficult for them in other states. But in Florida, we have a presumption of 50% custody. Now, I also have to tell you that we both represent 50% men and 50% women. That's our practice, and we are very balanced. There are times when I have the mother and the wife, and I want to do everything that I can to make sure that they get more time. And I know that we're talking about our men treated fairly. When you have a police officer, when you have a fireman, when you have somebody who travels a lot for their business, that is something that it is really hard to keep to a 50-50 custody arrangement.
But I've been able to do that in a number of cases. And if you think about it, firefighters, because of Kelly days and things of that nature, they might only end up working 4 days a month. So they have actually extra time to go ahead and spend that time with their kids. And police officers, depending upon where they are in their career, can go ahead and change that. Now, that's not always my client demographic. I represent more business owners, and business owners can be stuck traveling or have a more erratic schedule. Now, I know how I've handled things to try to accommodate their schedules and accommodate their time sharing. What do you think is the best tip for business owner fathers to go ahead and accommodate their time sharing schedules?
When it comes to divorce, these business owners haven't thought about how they can change their schedule so that they can see their children 50% of the time. They've always put their career first, or they didn't think to change their schedule so they could accommodate and have their children 50% of the time. So that's something that they can look into and look back on, and they can alter their schedule. And they can also, I advise them to jump in there immediately and participate to the best of their abilities as they're going forward from the day they come into my office. I know you do that too.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. Now, one of the top questions that I'm asked, aside from custody, is about men who've worked hard to go ahead and create their business? The same goes for women. And are they going to lose half of their business if they're getting divorced? And, some people might know and some people might not know that businesses can be joined in a divorce action depending upon the facts and circumstances. So, why don't you talk about this a little bit?
So let me tell you, you should have gotten a prenup. You should have gotten a prenup that would have kept the business under your control. However, if you have a smart lawyer like Leah, that's what she's going to do, because the court is not going to give your business to someone who doesn't know anything about this business, or even does know about it but isn't the lead. If you have a partner, if it's corporate, there are many ways that lawyers, you're going to keep your business. You may have to pay out a little bit, but you are going to keep your business.
What about situations where they can't come to an agreement, or there aren't enough assets and equitable distribution to give you your business? Have you seen situations where the court has forced people to sell their business?
I have had very, very, very little experience with the courts forcing someone to sell a business.
I agree. I think the courts generally try to avoid that. And I think most judges don't want to be causing that, because that's what formulates the income for the family.
So, what is it that you would do for a business owner who came to you and the wife wants the business? So, what would you tell him, and what strategies would you use in order for him to keep the business?
There are a number of different strategies I go ahead and employ. And I'd first start by documenting everything, documenting how the business got started, documenting who's worked in the business. A lot of times the wives will try to claim that they worked in the business, but they really didn't do anything, or the husbands were just paying them for tax purposes. So we go ahead and try to address that and provide that evidence for the court. And we also try to provide to the court, depending upon the type of business, what kind of specialized knowledge or training you have to run the business. And that's helped people. Likewise, we'll go ahead and get a variety of business valuation experts and forensic accountants to look into things for the business and try to figure out a creative way, including with financing or other types of options to buy out the other party.
I want you to talk about finances. What advice would you give? Because there are so many small businesses, or just businesses at all, where the money comes funneled into accounts that the non-business owner spouse has access to. What special advice would you give?
Well, if the non-business owner spouse has access to the money, in some situations that could be extremely dangerous, because I've had a number of cases where, and I'm working on
me
one
too.
right now, where the other party has gone ahead and emptied out the bank account.
Exactly.
Now you have a situation where you're jeopardizing the business, you're jeopardizing the livelihood of the family, and they don't want to give it up. And depending upon who opposing counsel is, it's a problem. And it could take 6 months to get into court and to have an evidentiary hearing, depending upon the county and the judge you're in front of. Mm-hmm. So it can be a complete nightmare. And I've seen things like this almost sink businesses.
Right, because you can't meet your payroll. It's terrible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And unfortunately, the courts generally don't see this as an emergency. I see it as an emergency. The business owner sees it as an emergency, but the judge doesn't always see it as an emergency because someone isn't dying or bleeding.
Right, or about to be kidnapped.
Yeah, so it's a huge problem. So another question that I'm asked a lot is, I'm paying alimony and child support. Is that really fair, or is that the system being biased? What do you think about this question?
The women's movement, and since the 50s, now we're, 75 years later, women are still making less than men, but there are lots of women who are doing very well and who do better than their spouses. So this is a situation where alimony can be paid by men or women.
Absolutely.
However, we both know that more men pay alimony than women.
Yes.
And it drives men and women crazy because they resent having to pay alimony.
Yeah, I think once people decide that they're done, They want to completely write off the other party as if they never existed and move on with their lives, and not realize that they've now created this higher level of lifestyle, and it's their fault that the other person wasn't working during the marriage because they picked that person. And they forget about that. And they also don't want to pay for their kids, which is insane to me because these are their kids. And just because they want to get rid of their relationship doesn't mean that they're getting rid of their kids. Although I've seen many male clients pretty much ignore their wife, ignore their kids, and move on to a new family.
But we've also seen men who are totally and utterly devoted to their kids.
100%. I've seen many wonderful fathers.
And the majority of men and women are devoted to their children and will pay anything for them, but don't want to pay $1 in alimony.
You're correct about that. I would say more and more, I see more men being devoted to their kids and wanting to take them to the activities and participate, and I think it's really fantastic. And I do see some women who are trying to prevent them from that, but not overall. Now, there's another question I'm asked a lot, that they've heard that women are typically favored in divorce settlements. Should they be concerned that they'll lose everything?
I had a series of a couple of men that I represented whose friends told them that they weren't going to get 50% custody, that the judges always gave the house to the wife, and that they were going to lose everything and lose all their equity in the house. And in the settlement as well as in trial, that wasn't the case. In Florida, that is not the case. They take the marital property and they cut it down the middle.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of fallacies about what happens around a divorce. And I think a lot of people hear these rumors and they go ahead and they panic from it. And sometimes they don't get out of a bad situation or a stressful situation or a situation involving domestic violence or emotional abuse because they're worried about stories that just aren't true.
Right. Old wives' tales, bubba mices. and they're not true. And they're not true.
So tell me about one case that you might have had where gender played a role in the outcome.
I've been practicing for decades. And in the old days, women were favored. They were favored to keep the house. That is just not the case anymore. The children's best interests are taken into account, but there is no more knee-jerk where the wife gets the house. Generally speaking, if one person doesn't buy out the other, the house gets sold. And that's exactly what happens. The equity, if it's in joint names, the equity will be equally split. Or the person who's buying out the house from the other person will refinance and buy them out. Although refinancing now is really difficult because the rates have gone up. You know, it's just, it's difficult, but people do it. My clients do it all the time.
I also see family members sometimes jumping in to help them and writing big checks to go ahead and get something settled so they can move on with their lives and stop paying lawyers' fees.
Right. Or co-signing, not the other spouse who is being bought out, but co-signing. Relatives, mostly relatives, parents and brothers and sisters definitely help in the buyout. Do you have a case that you remember where either where the wife was favored by the judge?
I can't think about a case where a wife was favored, but I can think of a paternity case where it started off kind of behind the eight ball for my client. And my client originally didn't.
Your client was the man?
My client was
the
man.
father. The father. Yeah.
Correct. And my client originally didn't even know that he was having a child. Oh, and he ultimately found out he was having a child. And not only did he want to step up, but he's been the most amazing dad. And I still talk to him to this day. He checks in with me and sends me pictures, and it's a wonderful experience. But we had to fight to get DNA testing. We had to fight to go ahead and get him visitation. He had been excluded from everything. And at the end of the day, over time, we've been able to change things. And because he's such a good dad, he actually has majority time sharing. And they
Wow.
deviated from the rules. So he has the minor child about 75% of the time.
Wow.
And he's just an amazing dad. And he tries so hard to do absolutely everything for his child so that his child can go ahead and do better in life than he's done. And I love seeing that.
I think that in marriages and divorces, that men in Florida are treated fairly.
And I think that paternity cases are now at the point where men are treated fairly.
That is because, as of what, a year ago, men now, from the minute the baby is born, they're the father if they signed the birth certificate. So make sure that you sign the birth certificate so that you are deemed to be the father from day one. That wasn't the case before.
Well, I think the biggest thing really that impacted fathers in paternity cases was the presumption of 50-50. I think that's even more significant.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
It
I think
is.
that was really a game changer for all the men from the divorces I saw earlier in my career as well, where there was a little bit of favoring of the wives or the mothers. And now it's presumptively equal unless there's a reason to depart from the guidelines. And that's very rare. And I think judges are very reluctant to do it these days unless there are extreme circumstances.
Let everyone know that most cases, 98% of cases, paternity cases, divorce cases, are settled. They're settled in a mediation and they don't get tried and have to go to court. But everybody knows, all lawyers know exactly what to expect from the court system when it comes to time sharing and visitation, when it comes to dividing up the different assets, the different properties that people have, and alimony and child support. There's calculations that go on. It's something that can be done much more easily now in mediation, and it is.
And I think that there's still some, overall challenges in terms of the whole process. But at the end of the day, I think men are treated very fairly these days, both in paternity cases and in divorce cases.
Yes,
So I think everything has really changed in the last
I
few
think it
decades.
has. It has, and especially in the last couple of years. 50-50 custody, 50-50 time sharing. That is a game changer. Men do not feel like they are treated fairly in many states. I would say that for paternity, before they changed the law in Florida, before they changed the law on time sharing to 50-50, men were not treated fairly in Florida.
I agree with that. I think that until recently, there was a presumption that the mother would have majority time sharing, or it'd be more of like a 70-30 split or a 60-40 split.
Right.
But it wasn't 50-50 automatically, and you really had to fight for that. And I think now it's presumed, and it's cut out a lot of the arguing between the lawyers. And I've seen it, shut down a lot of the litigation for people.
It has, but I get lots and lots of questions from lots of men who believe in Florida, as well as all the other states, that they are not getting a fair shake. And from what they tell me, not in Florida, they're not getting a fair shake. They have to pay for their children, but they don't see their children 50% of the time. They don't have decision making. And I think that the other states really need to follow Florida, which is a forerunner. Surprisingly, Florida has become an example that treats men fairly. So, in other states, I think other states should follow Florida law.
I agree. I agree. And one of these days, we can kind of do a symposium with some of my other friends from around the country
Oh, that would be wonderful.
and talk about how the different custody laws vary from state to state and how men are treated from state to state.
That would be great.
Because, not only is it informative, but I think that people have choices about where they live and they can make choices in their relationship before they get divorced. And that might ultimately help them and help them gain an advantage. I'm Leah Mayersohn, Mayersohn Law Group. Please like, follow, and subscribe. We'll hope to see you next week, and we're going to discuss how to protect your money from your spouse during a divorce. And overall, while there may be some challenges, The truth is that men really aren't automatically at a disadvantage in divorce in Florida. And there are many things that can be done in terms of preparation, documentation, and understanding the process. So if you're afraid about the process or you have any questions, please give us a call and we'll try to help. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm Denise Isaacs at Divorce Lawyer Denise on all platforms. If you'd like to talk to a lawyer, just call the number below. We can help you.